Hello. Old-timers on my channel will know that occasionally I take a riff into literature. This is not because I am a literature nerd. Well, I am, but that's not why I'm doing it in that particular situation. No, it's because, oh, go away. Sorry, I've been distracted by a disabled dog on a web page here. What happens is that I want people to know what I'm fighting for. It's all very well to talk about Western civilization being swamped by influences from the Islamic world or something like that. No, that's not what I'm talking about. What I am talking about is that the Western world has an honourable, rich and important culture and a remarkable history. And if we don't know about it, why are we fighting? We are just fighting for pure power, if we're, because there's nothing else. Now, that's sort of interesting because I have the impression that is what the Democrats and their running dogs are actually looking for. They don't know much about their culture. They don't know much about history, don't know much about geography. They just know they love power. And if they got power, what a wonderful world that would be. Now, and here we have a great example of somebody who, it just makes me despair. There are, of course, a group of Americans who are highly educated and know far more than I know. But there's a huge lot of Americans who don't know anything. I mean, they don't know anything at all. And it drives me nuts that people can be so uninformed. I'm not saying this doesn't happen in Britain as well. Of course it does. And it's happening more and more as education gets more woke. But it's really bad in America. And it's so bad that an NBC, just a minute, what is she? MSNBC or NBC news anchor. And, you should expect a certain level of education from a woman in this position, from anyone in this position. She doesn't know even the smallest bit. One of the most famous quote from the most, probably the two big Shakespeare plays, Hamlet and Macbeth. And she didn't recognise it. What happened was this. Ted Cruz was being interviewed about the impeachment of Donald Trump, the ridiculous pantomime going along around Donald Trump. And he said, this is what he said: "It's reminiscent of Shakespeare. It's full of sound and fury and yet signifying nothing." That's from Macbeth. And I'm just going to go into that in a minute. But what happened was that Mitchell sent this tweet. "Send Ted Cruz says impeachment trial is like Shakespeare, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. No, that's Faulkner," she tweeted, revealing the abyss of her ignorance. And the joke is that after that, a whole load of other people who followed her up saying, "Oh yeah, Ted Cruz is an idiot," without realising Faulkner was quoting Shakespeare. And if you want some more, artists, writers quote Shakespeare all the time. But you have to know Shakespeare. Brave New World, written by Aldous Huxley, was a quote from The Tempest. The Fault in Our Stars is a book, isn't it? Oh yes, Something Wicked This Way Comes, Ray Bradbury. The Dogs of War occurs in Star Trek at least twice that I can think of. It occurs it's the title of a DS9 episode, and in another episode, it's quoted with great glee by Christopher Plummer as General Chang. He was having a lot of fun with that role, wasn't he? In The Undiscovered Country. Yeah, but the thing was, this woman, what's her name, Mitchell. She's the sort of person who would think somebody saying, and the Dogs of War, they were quoting DS9. It's, it is actually heartbreaking when you find somebody with that level of ignorance, and then they are backed up by people equally ignorant. And what do you say? They don't know this because nobody ever taught them in school. They were probably learning interpersonal relationships or some such total nonsense. Now, look, I did actually, right now, where is it? I don't trust myself to say it properly without finding it. So just a minute. Tomorrow, she should have died hereafter. It was, she should have died hereafter. Tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow. Oh, here we are. Right, now, I'm going to talk to you about Macbeth because, strangely enough, this Mitchell, total nonsense, ignorant, bone stupid, illiterate person has actually brought up something which is sort of appropriate. It's appropriate for this minute. First of all, because I just mentioned Christopher Plummer, who died this last week. So I can give him a memory and remind everyone that he was a great and over-the-top General Chang. And that was and I'm sure he was having a fine time with that role. So that's one thing. It's given me a chance. But it's also, let's just talk about Macbeth. And, obviously Ted Cruz is well educated. And the fact that he used this quote, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing, about the impeachment, might mean that somewhere at the back of his mind, he was putting a lot of Macbeth together. Because it's all sort of fitting. Let's talk about Macbeth now. Macbeth is a play about a king and his wife who are both ambitious. And they can't get their goal by fair means, so they try foul. And of course, fair means or foul is a sort of switch coming from Macbeth. Fair is foul and foul is fair. Just a minute, what was that? Something about the oh gosh. Fair is foul and foul is fair. Hover through the fog and filthy air. All right, so that's also in my mind. Now look, Macbeth is a play about a man of relatively weak character who is being pushed by an ambitious wife who doesn't realise the consequences of her sellout to evil. She thinks she can do it and then discovers it finally drives her mad. In the prosecution of this ambition, she has to destroy Duncan, the king. And she gets her husband to do it. But it doesn't stop there, because what happens is they discover that once you start a path of crime, you just have to keep on doing more and more crimes. And each time you do it, you tear a little bit more off your soul. He starts with Duncan, but then, of course, he has to kill the two bodyguards who were looking after Duncan. They didn't commit suicide is the only thing I can say on YouTube without getting this whole video taken off the air. Okay, so it's about an ambitious political coup, and then as soon as it's accomplished, it starts to unravel. Ghosts turn up at the feast. Things like, let's just give an example, like Cuomo hiding the fact that he deliberately condemned 13,000 people to death, knowing what he was doing, apparently. Other things are coming up now that Duncan is gone. It's sort of appropriate because Duncan was a Scottish king. Now that Duncan is gone, people are losing loyalty. Previously loyal or at least obedient followers are starting to spill the beans. Things are starting to come out. People are starting to squabble among themselves and fall apart. And that's what happens in Macbeth, but perhaps some of you can see a parallel here. I'm going to talk about Macbeth's speech. You see, what happens is that Lady Macbeth, I think we all know who she is, has discovered that all the ambitious manoeuvring she's been doing is starting to look pretty sour. It's not as great as she thought it was going to be. The power is not as complete. She has to keep on making more and more manoeuvring to maintain her position. But when you commit crimes, you know that you're in a weak position, and it starts to eat at you, and it starts to make you suspicious and paranoid and vengeful. And it just gets worse and worse. And finally, her mind snaps. This is Lady Macbeth I'm talking about now. Her mind snaps, and she's wandering around on the castle walls, and then finally, either she jumps or she just missteps because she doesn't really know where she is, one or the other. She's trying to wash her hands. That's the out, damn spot thing, which this NBC Mitchell person probably thinks she's quoting, I don't know what Persil advert. So this is what Macbeth says when he gets the news that his wife has died. And it is one of the bleakest, most heartbreaking speeches in all of English literature, because what he's saying is everything is for nothing. You see, he gave his soul away. And when you have no soul, there's no point in being alive anymore. That's basically what's being said here. So he gets the news that his wife has died, and all he said is, she should have died hereafter. She should have died years later. But that's all he can say. They did have a very strong sexual relationship at the beginning of the play, but the evil they've been doing has corrupted even their physical love for each other. She should have died hereafter. There would have been a time for such a word. Tomorrow. And tomorrow. And tomorrow creeps in this petty pace from day to day to the last syllable of recorded time. Do you see how he's talking about an immense stretch of eternity? And there's nothing in it, just this creeping thing, one day after another. That's totally meaningless. That is hell, isn't it? And then he talks about his past. He doesn't have a future, and now his past has been turned into dust by what he's been doing. I'll read the whole thing when I stopped explaining it. And all our yesterdays have lighted fools the way to dusty death. Out, out, brief candle, life's but a walking shadow. Now, if you imagine, when your plays in Shakespeare's time were performed during the day because of the lighting, but there must have been candles there as well. There must have been times when it was quite dark in the theatre, and they would have had some sort of candles there, and you would have seen the shadows of the players on the back of the stage. And that might be a reference to that, but everybody in that time would know about shadows, because you carried candles with you wherever you went. There was no such thing as flood lighting. You had your own light, you carried that with you, and that left a shadow on the wall, and the shadow followed you on the wall, and then it was gone. If the candle went, so did the shadow, and that's what he's talking about. Life's but a walking shadow, a poor player, and then he's talking about theatrical performances. So an actor is just a shadow of somebody who lives, but it's not the real person. It also, we have to remember that Shakespeare would have been acquainted with Plato's shadow idea, the idea that most ordinary people are content with shadows on the wall rather than reality, because the light would be too bright. That the light it's called the allegory of the cave. That is, that some people might be in the cave and all they can see is the shadows of people who are living in the bright world, but they themselves, if they went out there, they'd be blinded by the light. Okay, and it might be that he was referring to that as well. Life's but a walking shadow, a poor player that struts and frets his hour upon the stage, and then is heard no more. It is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. He's talking about these great histrionic plays where actors, bellow out grand sounding words, and then 5 minutes later you wouldn't know what they were talking about, even if you understood it at the time. All right, I'll just go through that again, and I want you to remember what's going on in America right now, the political situation, because if you look at the play Macbeth, you will see a lot of parallels. And the reason why people should study Shakespeare is he observed human nature. He understood how people were in their souls. It's not just like the special effects epics that don't actually tell you anything about human nature. Shakespeare did. And that's why we have to fight for our culture, and we have to know Shakespeare. And we have to show proper derision of the people who don't. And kudos to Ted Cruz and, well, I don't have words to describe how an NBC leader could be so semi-literate she doesn't recognise a quote from one of Shakespeare's most important plays. All right. She should have died. No, sorry. I shouldn't smile at that, should I? I'm just talking about an idiot woman, and then I say she should have died hereafter. It sounds like I'm referring to her, right? Okay. She should have died hereafter. There would have been a time for such a word. Tomorrow. And tomorrow. And tomorrow creeps in this petty pace from day to day to the last syllable of recorded time. And all our yesterdays have lighted fools the way to dusty death. Out, out, brief candle, life's but a walking shadow, a poor player that struts and frets his hour upon the stage and then is heard no more. It is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. Why not treat yourself or a favoured relative or friend to these magnificent examples of merch? The mugs and t-shirts come in the Graniopteryx design or Grambo with a firearm or the more deadly knitting needles. Go to www.graniopteryx.com and whatever platform you're watching this on, please click like, subscribe and share.